Fear and Hunger is a dark, violent RPG series. And when I say dark, I mean in every sense of the word. It implies and shows scenes of graphic violence, sexual violence, torture, suicide, nudity, child abuse, war, and mental trauma. But players who brave its harsh and unforgiving exterior will find a rich world waiting to be discovered. Crafty and cruel gods, ancient betrayals, political manipulation, and strong heroes cutting through the darkness to claim the ultimate prize. Lore in Fear and Hunger is revealed primarily in two ways. Conversations with characters, some of whom are ancient beings who saw the things we're about to discuss firsthand, or through books both ancient and new scattered throughout the places we explore. However, just like our own world, political powers seek to change these stories for their own ends, and you can find rare copies of the books that tell a completely different story than the mass-produced versions. So in the world of Fear and Hunger, there are always two stories, what the majority believe, and what actually happened. There is a real joy in piecing together the story of the world, only to find a single book that completely changes everything. So I'll offer one final warning. If you're like me and enjoy putting the puzzle together yourself, stop watching now and go play the games. The games are definitely worth your time. They're terrifying and brutally punishing, but rich and rewarding for those who can face the trials. For everyone else, let's get into it. When talking about the lore of Fear and Hunger, there's only one place to start, with the gods. There are three kinds of beings known as gods: the old gods, the new gods, and the ascended gods. Their power and influence vary wildly, but all of them are detached and aloof from humanity. Many humans even doubt they exist at all, but their influence is clear to those who know where to look. What exactly the old gods are is a mystery. They wield great and terrible power. By merely existing, they reshape the laws of reality, and being in their presence can transform and distort the body and minds of mere humans. They're associated with a strange light called the green hue, which itself can send humans mad. Like a pebble thrown into a pond, they leave traces of themselves even after they've long since left our world. By performing certain rituals, one can apparently gain the favour of old gods and be gifted new abilities. The first of the old gods we're introduced to are Sylvian, the god of creation, and Grogoroth, the god of death. The two form a pair. There cannot be destruction without creation, and there's no room for creation without destruction making space. Sylvian is said to have created humanity at the dawn of time, and loved them dearly. In fact, being the goddess of love, her affection was too much for humans to handle, and there was a period of time when humanity fell into a craze of fleshly delights, a sea of naked people in the middle of coitus who would pulsate and waste their days. The power she blesses humans with can heal, grow magic flowers, and even merge two people together in what's called a Sylvian marriage. Sexual acts, such as masturbation or sex, on a Sylvian sigil will bring her favour. Grogoroth, on the other hand, was the exact opposite of Sylvian. The destruction he brings is widely feared, but it is of a pure kind. It is brought down on everyone equally. Everyone dies, everything ends, and everything decays. He's said to be curious, more than the other old gods, and he wears the skin and bodies of his victims to relive the feeling of fear. The magic he bestows is powerful and deadly. Spells that allow the user to direct their negative feelings of hatred into deadly attacks, summon a golem made out of their own blood, and even revive the dead in a near mindless state. At some point in time, Sylvian and Grogoroth mated, and the old god Venushka was born. Venushka was the god of nature, and embodied both creation and destruction. This god's temperament was changeable. It could be as wild as a fiery volcano, or as calm as a gentle wind on the grasslands. Venushka stood in balance to humanity. What is Venushka's is for men to reap, just as nature reaps man's old and weary. No rites or rituals of Venushka are shown in-game, but the god's power is. Venushka's spells mirror its demeanour, with healing spells and the ability to grow plant, alongside fearsome pyromancies and ankle-breaking roots. Little is known about the old god Rur. He's called the trickster moon god, and is apparently a god of madness, or some say he merely reveals the true nature of things. The moon itself is his body, observing the world below as he drifts quietly. His presence marks the festival of Termina, a 3-day bloodbath for every person caught in his moonlight, which is the setting of the second game in the series. The festival is hosted by his servant and spokesman, Pekeli, but as we find out later, he secretly serves another master. Pekeli reveals that Rare has long since left the human world, and despite having strong influence still, all that is left are his traces. At some point in early history, the old gods created humanity. Sylvian asked another being called Vitruvia to design men and women, and Sylvian then went on to use these plans to make humanity real. Vitruvia is likely another old god, but information on them is very scarce. One more old god present in the games is the God of the Depths, who, despite being an important character in Fear and Hunger 1, we know little about. Its followers include insects, rats, crows, and other vermin. This god is unique in that it is physically present, and you can find its organs spread around the dungeon, although it doesn't speak. Most of these old gods discussed so far, despite having major influence over the world of Fear and Hunger, have all vanished by the time of the games. The traces of Grogoroth can be fought in the first game, and there they say that the old gods left because of humanity's unchecked desire to usurp the old gods' power and claim everything for themselves. Long after the old gods created humanity, another god was born. Not quite an old god, but something different. The son of a virgin mother and a false god father, Ulmir was a mortal man who travelled the world with his 12 apostles to unite the people. The corrupt rulers at the time were afraid of his popularity and had him sentenced to death by crucifixion, after which he was resurrected and became the first known ascended god. With his new strength, he united humanity in his worship, a worship that remains strong into the current age, although the political world order he established had weakened greatly even 800 years later. In Termina, we hear a second, slightly different telling of this story. In this version, we hear that it was Vitruvia, the architect who designed humans in the first place, who made Ulmir. After Sylvian began making humans from Vitruvia's designs, Vitruvia began noticing more and more imperfections in them. So she set out to design the perfect human, the pinnacle of man's potential, and created Ulmir. Which one of these stories is true is impossible to say, but perhaps they both are. The rites and rituals of Ulmir are bloody and gruesome. The most common is a ritual of protection. By sacrificing a living person on a spiked crucifix, protection is granted to a town or community for as long as the person stays alive in that position. Ulmir is something different from an old god, although what exactly he is wasn't made clear until much, much later. "800 years after the birth of Ulmir, humanity was once again facing untold suffering. By now, the gods had seemingly abandoned humanity, so 5 people formed the Fellowship, a group designed to seek out the old gods and demand the right of self-governance for mankind. They were Francois, the Dominating, Nilvan, the Endless, Valtiel, the Enlightened, Chambara, the Tormented, and finally, a 5th, Forgotten one. The Fellowship travelled to Mahab, the city of the gods, but instead of finding the old gods, they instead found the ability to become gods themselves, calling themselves the New Gods. One of their party refused to join in godhood and faded in memory as the Forgotten one. The New Gods emerged from Mahab and tore down the legacy of the old gods and created a new world order in their image. Or so the official histories would have you believe. In Fear and Hunger 1, we delve deep into the dungeon of Fear and Hunger, which we discover is the trail of the Fellowship and the path to Mahab. Beyond the gates of the city of the gods, we find many truths to ancient lies. The old gods have indeed long since abandoned humanity, but in the time since, there has been an endless cycle of new gods who rise and fall, their power a pale imitation of the ancient ones. Any human who could face the trial and sit on the throne could ascend to godhood, but for what purpose? An endless series of would-be gods sit in the grand hall, waiting endlessly for nothing. "800 years after the Fellowship became new gods, their power was fading. Humanity was suffering yet again, and one man was prophesied to unite all people under his banner and bring peace. Once again, the powers that be hated and feared him, and he was imprisoned in the dungeons of fear and hunger. This dungeon was the very same tomb that the Fellowship traversed on the path to godhood, and its horrors had only increased in the time since. 4 heroes entered to find the man imprisoned here, each for their own reasons. This man, Lagarde, was an unstoppable military commander, charismatic, and determined to ascend to godhood, a true god for humanity. What exactly happened while the heroes were in the dungeon is lost to history. But at the end of everything, 2 gods were born. Lagarde, obsessed with his own prophecy, attempted to perfect the ritual to become a new god by embodying the aspects of each of his predecessors: domination, endlessness, enlightenment, and torment. Despite everything, however, the inherent process of becoming a new god was flawed, and he failed to become something greater than the others. After some time, Lagarde left the dungeon in a new form, as the new god known as the Yellow King. But what of the second god? The dungeon served as both a trial for anybody who wanted to enter Mahab, but also as a cradle for a young girl. She, too, was born of a false god and a chosen human, much like how Ulmir was conceived. But she spent her life in darkness and misery. Growing in the horrors of the dungeon, the little girl underwent untold suffering, becoming the pure representation of the concepts of fear and hunger, not spoiled by even a glimmer of hope. When the heroes entered the dungeon, several things happened. The girl was rescued, the old god of the depths was slain, and the dark soul within the girl planted its roots and grew from the old god's death. With this, the god of fear and hunger was born, a second ascended god, the second in history after Ulmir. This event gives us an important distinction of ascended gods. They're born from a human conceived by a false god, and they ascend using the death of an old god. The birth of this god was orchestrated to kickstart humanity out of its millennia of stagnation. Fear motivated people, while hunger kept them moving forward. From the hardship, humanity pushed themselves into great technological advancement, eventually leaving the belief in gods and magic behind. Over time, the gods faded into memory, their worship and rituals relegated to backwater towns and churches, and magic faded to the point that most people no longer believed it was even real. The new gods were no longer known as benevolent gods, but instead became known as a kind of mythological secret society, a shadowy group controlling things behind the scene, which was more true than people realized. With the birth of the god of fear and hunger, the prophecy of Lagarde was forgotten about by the people, but not by him. He became obsessed with bringing about a new god for humanity, one made of humanity's own power and not borrowing the power of the old gods. He manipulated world events behind the curtain for hundreds of years, eventually coming out of the shadows and taking over the Bremen Empire to lead them directly as the Kaiser. Using the rapidly advancing technology of the era, he began constructing a new machine, one to take the information of humans spread out across the world and compile it into a new being, a divine being, to usher humanity into a new age. This machine was called Logic. War broke out with the enemy of the Bremen Empire, the Eastern Union, before the Logic project could be completed. The Yellow King, as the Kaiser, expended all wartime effort to reclaim the land the Logic project was built on. The politically unimportant but ancient capital city of the country of Bohemia, called Pre-Hevel. The moment his armies recaptured the city, he called for a truce and set to work on Logic again. Why was Logic built in such an out-of-the-way place, and not in the heart of the Bremen Empire? No specific reasons are given, but Pre-Hevel held dark secrets of its own. The city was the site of ancient rare worship, the trickster moon god who was thought to be one of the few old gods left. In fact, as the Logic project approached completion, the Festival of Termina started, marking the presence of Rare. As stated earlier, however, Rare was no longer with us, and his festival had been hijacked by Pekeli and his new master. Seemingly unbeknownst to all the major players, another secret god was writhing under the surface. Pekeli reveals to the contestant who faces him in Termina that he serves the hidden Sulphur god, a god of pain and suffering, whose cultists inflict the same on others. Elsewhere, we hear that during Ulmir's ascension to godhood, he cast off his hatred and evil into the sulphurous pits, suggesting that this dark god was created as the shadow of Allmere himself. What sulfur wants, and where it fits in the hierarchy of gods, is a complete mystery. There are still lots of questions about the lore that we're waiting on answers for. We know that ascended gods require the death of an old god. So what god died so Allmere could ascend? What is the sulfur god? Where does it fit in the pantheon? And what does it want? What is logic? And what is its relation to rare? Is it just another set of shackles humanity has carved for itself? Or are they finally going to be free? The developer, Miro, is still actively updating Termina and adding new content, so we may get answers to some of these questions yet. The story of fear and hunger is one of humanity trying to push its boundaries, ascend to godhood, and take charge of its own destiny. What does it take for a man to become a god? Are we prepared to face the deepest suffering in order to ascend? And what if the cost is greater than we can possibly know? There are a lot of things I didn't go into in this video. That's intentional. I wanted this one to serve as a short overview of the setting before we can dive into the really juicy stuff. And trust me, there's a lot going on when you get into it. So make sure to subscribe if you're interested in hearing more about the world of fear and hunger, and let me know if there's a specific topic you'd like covered next. Or just let me know what you thought about the video in general. Any feedback helps a lot. I also stream Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, so make sure and come say hi. Thank you again for watching. My name's Morday Duke, and I hope to see you again soon.